For July 2018, the topic of Pathrick Steps meetings and study guides was conflict between conscious and unconscious desires, which is Pathrick Lecture 45. I want to start off before I go into how the different topics, subtopics that I figured out. I'm going to go in for a second about defining all these terms and coming up with all these words. The analogy I came up with is a rainbow. When a kid draws a rainbow, you take 4 crayons, you draw an arc in the sky, rainbow. When we draw distinctions between conscious and unconscious desires, it's like trying to describe a rainbow with 4 crayons. There isn't a hard line between these. It's a gradation, it's a transition stage from one to the other. So you can divide it into as many sections as you would like to divide it into. It's not uncommon to divide that into conscious, pre-conscious, and unconscious. Because the reality is we can't work with the unconscious. That's the definition of unconscious. What we can work with is part of the unconscious part of us that is moving into consciousness. We can also work with any part of the unconscious that acts out so that we can get feedback. So feedback is a critical factor in all of this work. So the first thing is that there's no hard line. These words are for convenience and to move through some concepts. And the second is that feedback will show us where we have a conflict, where what we say and what we do don't match. And you'd think we could notice that. But the reality is that we've developed blind spots about any discrepancies between what we say and think and how we act. We've papered them over with justifications or rationalizations. We don't notice it. So what does feedback look like? The guide talks about different kinds of feedback. One is to have a coach, a helper to work with. Second is to have group to work with. A group being 2 or 3 people or a larger group, so that you can have a chance to not only verbalize what you think and feel, but a chance for people to give you feedback on what they hear. Now, this doesn't always work that well because people are a little nervous about giving feedback. So then the third group is your friends, and your friends are perhaps less reluctant to give you feedback on that doesn't make sense to me, or but you said that yesterday. Your family will give you feedback. It may not always be appreciated, but they know you very intimately, and they're able to pull things from your past and compare them to your present in a way that many of our acquaintances, co-workers, etc., cannot. So feedback comes from many, many different aspects. The goal is for us to manage to create our own feedback loop. And for that, we use the tool of daily review, which at first we do in writing, and later we do as you doze off at night or when you wake up in the morning, where you just review what happened yesterday. And you don't even have to consciously try to review it. You just allow any leftovers from the day to run through your head. As a general rule, we remember the problems more than we remember the fun bits. So that they will come very easily to you. You just wake up saying, oh, what did I do yesterday? I wasn't thinking and I said this and that. It will stay with you. So the idea is that we notice what stays with us, what is disharmonious, rather than trying to find things that are negative or bad. Anything that disturbs you is fair game. And then the goal is to try to find a pattern of behavior, 5 or 6 things that actually revolve around a similar attitude, so that we can focus on that. It's more productive. So that's like if you want to go after one thing and you can deal with disharmonies that happen every week, that's a very productive area to go after, versus something that only causes a disharmony once every 6 months or a year. You can do it. The question is, was it worth the time and effort to do it? Allow it to grow until it's more prevalent, until it's more common, before you spend your time addressing it. I'm saying this because there's only so much time in the day we can spend towards this work, And you're welcome to spend time looking at things that only happen once or twice a year. The benefits will be less than if you address something that comes up weekly for you. So conflict between conscious and unconscious desires. The prior month, we looked at negative pleasure, Catholic Lecture 140. And in that lecture, the guide talks about a recipe. I love recipes when I find them in the lectures. Talks about pain is the result of conflict, which is the result of negativity. So negativity produces conflict, and conflict produces pain. So you can work it from front to back or back to front. If you find the negativity, you look for the conflict and the pain. If you find the pain, you look for the conflict and the negativity. This lecture is about the conflict. And one of my favorite images for describing this conflict is of a sea anchor. And a picture from Wikipedia is in all the study guides. And a sea anchor is basically a bucket that you throw overboard when you can't reach the bottom with a regular anchor. So you have the wind driving you in one direction or the waves driving you in one direction. You throw the bucket overboard, it fills with water, and it pulls. As you drive forward, your forward motion fills the bucket with water, and so it retards your movement. And it's a way to anchor yourself in one place when you're in deep waters. Conscious and unconscious desires behave like this. It's as if the conscious is what's above the surface, so it's the wind and perhaps the currents. And the unconscious is that bucket that you threw over and forgot that you threw it over. And it retards your progress. So you say, for instance, I want a relationship, but I can't seem to manifest one. Well, in your past, you may have made a decision which may have been conscious at the time, but it recedes into your unconscious, that relationships are painful. Now, especially if we get these images during childhood, we may not remember where we got them or even that we had them. We may not even have, as children, we don't think about these things. We don't say, relationship causes pain, therefore I must never be in a relationship. We simply experience and observe and contract against something that seems to cause pain. So we file it away as relationship causes pain. And then later when we're attempting to reach out and create relationship, we've got this drag on us, this force that basically contracts and pulls back and says, I don't want to. So this is how you can begin to feel the conflict between conscious and unconscious desires. Again, the desire may be unconscious, but it may manifest here and there. And it's as if you're using a spiritual peripheral vision to try to capture discrepancies, disharmonies, incidents that don't square with what you consciously believe that you want. So, I divided the lecture into 4 subtopics. One is the guide's teaching that life is a manifestation of our own beliefs. Secondly, the power of thoughts, emotions, and habits. Third is uncovering unconscious desires, which is the work part. And fourth, the power of mass images. So let me say a little bit about each one of those. Life being a manifestation of our own beliefs. You may not agree with that. You may think I make my own destiny. I'm not being controlled by things in my belief system. I am controlled, or life goes on because of objective stuff. But there's nothing really objective in the world. We always have choices about whether we engage or do not engage. We have choices about how much we engage or how little we engage. So for instance, if I take any relationship belief, if I believe that relationship should be something I have, but I have this unconscious belief that relationship will cause pain, I don't fully commit. I don't give my fullest. I don't try as hard. I make mistakes. I'm careless. I'm thoughtless. And then we begin to rationalize and justify, I'm not in a relationship because I'm a blunt speaker. That's not why you're in a relationship. There are examples of a relationship with every personality under the sun. The reason we're not in relationship is because either that's not our spiritual path or because we've got some resistance to putting out a sign on the front lawn saying, I'm ready to have a relationship. So in this sense, the guide teaches that your life reveals what your underlying beliefs and attitudes must be. So one of the techniques for looking at this is to take an inventory. This is what my life looks like. This is what I wanted my life to look like. And to notice the discrepancy between those two. That's going to take a little bit of imagination to consider what belief could I be holding that prevents me from moving forward. If I believe that I should be important and in charge of something, but I'm afraid of revealing myself, that fear of revealing myself is going to prevent me from taking overt action, from volunteering for more public work, or volunteering for leadership positions, because I'm afraid of actually doing it. And that little hesitation is read by others. And this is where we do not behave alone. People don't name it. They don't say, I see the blue aura surrounding you and the yellow. They don't talk like that. But Catholic teaches, and many spiritual New Age modalities teach, that people sense the energy around you. So they don't know what it is. They just know there's something. And when they sense that reluctance, or, for instance, they sense a forcing current of, I must have this, they might contract from that. If they sense a hesitancy, they might not want to trust you with an important task because they're sensing some hesitation on your part. They don't know what it is. That hesitancy on their part is filled in by their own belief systems, by their cliches, by their judgments, by their bias, by their own stuff about men, women, tall, short, aggressive people, passive people. They're going to be filling in the blanks on their own. These are not things that we talk about openly. One of the joys of being in a spiritual group is you get to talk about things that have never been talked about. That was my experience. I realized soon after I started joining groups that I wasn't crazy, that my experiences, that my interpretations, that things that I felt that I thought were going on were actually going on. But I had never been able to verbalize it in the first place. And secondly, people would simply say, I didn't say that. I don't know what you're talking about. And faced with that, you either believe their words or their energy. You're interpreting their actions, which is not considered a friendly thing to do. Anyway, I lost my train of thought there for a second. The idea is that we participate in each other's reality based on signals that we are getting that we may not realize that we are getting. I'll give you a very small example. I've never been a person to wear makeup, but I did try for a while. And I wondered what that was about. It just never did it. I wondered what it was about. And finally, I began to realize that wearing makeup was a signal that I was open to dating or being in a relationship. That without the makeup, they thought I was not interested in being out there. That may not be fair, but it is an acceptable social custom. And eventually I decided I'll take the consequences of not giving that signal because I don't like this stuff. But that's an example of where we may not realize the full implications of actions we take. We may think that we're only doing something that's a personal preference without realizing that it's read by others and interpreted by others in specific ways that we may not be used to. So what I'm speaking of now is the idea that life is a manifestation of our belief system, that we carry it around. I like to talk about the image of having little beacons on the top of our head that, like little sirens, saying, I'm interested in this, I'm not interested in that, that are sending out some kind of radio microwave frequency without us realizing it, read by others without them realizing that they are receiving it. And we, of course, are receiving theirs. And this is how my belief systems will shape my interactions with people as well as my experiences. It will change objective reality because, as I said, there really isn't an objective reality. It's a matter of how you see it. So, for instance, one person can go to the auto parts store, and if they've got a gruff and belligerent attitude, the clerk takes that on. The clerk goes into defense. And it's not very helpful. Somebody goes into an auto parts store and they say, oh, please help me, I have this, and I would really appreciate your concern. And they bend over backwards sometimes to help out somebody who's genuinely asking for help. Same store, sometimes same clerk, and yet a completely different customer experience. My invitation to you is to make a list in your daily review of incidents that were disharmonious, that involved other people, and consider whether you are the only person to have that experience, whether everybody has that experience, or whether it is a consistent experience you have over numerous times and places with numerous kinds of people, and to begin to see patterns that when you're grumpy, people behave in a manner, people are grumpy back to you. So to begin to consider that life is not quite as objective as we like to think it is. There's a lot of subjectivity in what goes on in our lives. The second week was the power of thoughts, emotions, and habits. I don't think I need to go into habits. They're hard to break. So there's a whole popular culture industry in changing habits, where you have to take active action to not do something that you were doing because it has become unconscious. You don't think about it. So if you tie a string around your finger and the string flashes at you, it brings that back into consciousness. Oh, that's right, I have to remember. Here's an example. If you damage one of your fingers or one of your toes, you begin to realize how active the pinky finger is or how active your ring finger is in a way that you never realized that before because your attention was not drawn to it. So to break a habit, we need to have our attention drawn to it and have a plan of action on how we're going to change an ingrained pattern of behavior. But in terms of spiritual work, I want to focus for a second on the power of thoughts and emotions. The guide says that it is hard to fully understand how much more powerful emotions are than thoughts. So if you have thoughts, emotions, and habits, habits become an unconscious acting ability. But emotions carry a lot more weight than thoughts. I can think something, but if I have an emotion that pushes me forward, it'll run right past that thought. So emotions are extremely strong. They've also run in current, like habits, and thought processes run in current. So we tend to think in a certain way. When we're trying to change how we address life, we need to look at all three of these. It's a lot of work. The other aspect in this second week was that the lower self very often likes to accompany a higher self action, thought, or feeling. Meaning, that's a bit of a cartoon discussion of lower self. It's pitching a ride. But what the guide is talking about is that sometimes when we're doing a good deed, we don't notice that other thoughts and feelings ride with it, that they go with it, and they're not examined. Because we believe that the good deed means everything we do in that particular arena or that particular aspect are good. And that's the perfect place for some negativity to ride in, or some snarkiness. I'm sure that all of you have noticed in a conversation sometime where someone says something negative or mean-spirited out of the blue. It's as if they're not even aware that they're saying it. And that's because they feel that they're in a conversation and they're having a good time, and they're not guarding against negative thoughts and feelings emerging. It's another example of where good feedback is to catch those moments and say, what was that about? The third week was uncovering unconscious desires, and of course that's the work. One of the points made in doing the actual work is the question, what if we don't know what we want? It's not an uncommon situation where we're not exactly sure what we think or feel. And that comes from decades of repressing the awareness, where we don't understand our emotions or thoughts, and so we don't wish to be conscious about them. So we chase away any review, any attention. We don't pay attention to those thoughts and feelings because we're not sure what they're about and we don't want to hear about it. So we're always looking over there, and the thought and feeling is over here. And then after decades, we say, I really don't know what I think or feel. Well, it's going to take some time and effort to give it some attention, to analyze, to understand what is going on. This is who I was when I started the work. It used to really irritate me when people would say, how do you feel? It infuriated because I didn't know, and I felt stupid because I didn't know how I felt. And the reality was that I had suppressed any information about thoughts and feelings that were not in alignment with where I thought I should be, to the point where I no longer recognized it. So sometimes the beginning of the work is, while it is important, and while it is very important, takes a time. So one of the things I run into with working with people is they want an answer now. Okay, I appreciate this. I also like immediate action and immediate answers. The truth is that it is important to spend some time in observation. The metaphor, the analogy that I found during my travels was when you get a map of a new city, number one, you need to know where you are. The map doesn't do you any good at all until you know where you are. So you need a map. You need to know where you are. And then you need to know where you're going. Where you are is the equivalent of knowing what our thoughts and feelings are. Knowing what we want is a matter of having picked a goal. If you haven't been in contact with your thoughts and feelings for a long time, you're not going to be able to uncover overnight where you want to go. You need to learn something about it before you'll understand to some depth where you want to go in it. So the first stage is to figure out where you are. And then the second is to go ahead and experiment. So another thing that people do is they say, well, I need to find the right answer. I need to know where I'm going. No, you really don't. You can set a goal and get yourself there. And it's not that hard to figure out after a while that's not the goal I really want. Or you attain it and say, well, that was a small goal. I think there's a bigger goal. The invitation is that if you do not know what you want, to accept that you've minimized the information, you've closed all the channels. You need to open those channels back up and get them working. That you know your own thoughts and feelings, your own reactions, your own desires. And then give them a place to go, even if it's short term. And if it is long term, people change college majors, they change jobs, they move from city to city, they change relationships. They change who they are multiple times throughout their lifetime. Why should this be any different? That as you evolve and grow and find out more truth about yourself, you open up more vistas, more possibilities, more options that you can now perceive. And before you couldn't have named it because you couldn't. So that part is a little bit of uncovering unconscious desires. And then the last section is in the power of mass images. This complicates things. Not only do we have preconceived ideas and strong ideas about what's right and wrong, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what is going to bring approval and what is not going to bring approval. But we as groups of people, communities, groups of people as cultures, even groups of people as nations, and as a race, we have multiple ideas of what is good, what is bad, how people should be raised, how people should behave, how government should interact with people. And of course, there's a large amount of difference in the world. The idea is that there are mass images in our cultures, communities, and nations that we may become susceptible to. In other words, if it aligns with the image that you have personally, you don't notice that it's a mass image, you just think that's normal. However, when you don't align with the mass image, you find yourself as an outsider. It's easier to work with the idea if you're an outsider than if you're squarely in the middle of where your culture, your society, your community wants to go. But the idea is to, number one, be aware that there are mass images, and secondly, to realize that you may be affected without actually knowing that you were affected by it. So a lot of us, myself included, like to pretend that we're not affected by society, and that's naive, because we are affected by it. We feel the pain of rejection by society. We have the desire for approval by society. And then there's how do you do that, both acceptable and non-acceptable in doing it. So there's also a lecture on mass images, which is very nice section on mass images. So this is topic lecture 45, the conflict between conscious and unconscious desires. It's what I call a working lecture, in that it gives you a lot of suggestions and a lot of ideas for what to do that are quite practical. So thanks for listening. I hope you do read the actual lecture. Study guides are meant to make it easier to begin the study, but ultimately my hope is that you will read the actual source material. Thanks.